And talking about these camping trips, there was one in particular that there's a great story that goes with one of these camping trips.
Yes, the vagabonds, as they were called, rolled into a small town and the car conked out. And they got the car into a local mechanic shop, and the mechanic suggested that there might be something wrong with the tires of the automobile. And a man stood up in the car and said, "No, that can't be true. I'm Harvey Firestone. I made these tires. Nothing's wrong with them at all." So the mechanic shrugged his shoulders and suggested, well, the problem could also be a mechanical problem. There could be something wrong with the motor of the car. Another man in the automobile stood up and said, "Not possible. I'm Henry Ford. I made this Model T Ford, and it's in perfect running condition." And the mechanic decided to give it one more try and suggested, well, the car could have an electrical problem of some sort. And another man in the car stood up and said, "I'm Thomas Alva Edison, and I can say that the electrical system in this car is faultless." And the mechanic had had it at that point. He pointed to John Burroughs with his long white beard and said, "All right, and I suppose you're going to tell me that that man is Santa Claus."
Great story. And it's just a classic of it. Could you imagine encountering these industrial giants all in the same car, touring the country and going on these camping trips? That must have been mind-blowing.
Yeah, another great story, and this one might actually be true, is they stopped along the road. There was a farmer in a car, and the farmer's car was not running properly. And Ford was a first-rate mechanic, and he liked to help people. And so they pulled over, and Ford rolled up his sleeves and got out and fixed this man's car. The man didn't know who Ford or the rest of the people who he was with in the car were, and the farmer wanted to pay Ford for fixing his car. And Ford told the farmer that he had no need for money. He had enough money to last him many lifetimes. And the farmer looked at him skeptically and said, "Friend, if you had enough money to last you many lifetimes, you wouldn't be driving a Ford." And Thomas Edison found that highly amusing, and I guess teased Ford about that during the rest of the trip.
How many years did they travel? How many of these camping trips did they go on?
Well, the ones I know best are the ones that Burroughs was part of, and they got together for a trip in Fort Myers in 1914, and then Burroughs camped with them in 1916, and 1918, and 1919. In 1920, Burroughs died after the 1920 camping trip, but the trips continued for many years after that. The next one, the President of the United States, Warren Harding, went along in the camping trip. Burroughs didn't think much of Harding, so it's probably just as well he wasn't along for that one.
Was it a once-a-year trip?
It was a once-a-year thing.
And picked just different places in America by that time in the teens and 20s, national parks, or where would they primarily camp?
Yep, sometimes national parks, sometimes just small towns. Part of the idea of these trips is these guys were celebrities, and it's hard for celebrities to live anything like a normal life then and now. So they just like to go out and head out, often even without an itinerary, sometimes just pull off beside the road and set up their campsite. And it was not unusual for farmers or local people to come along, not recognize them, and threaten them and try to drive them away. But usually a few $5 bills would change hands, and then the camping would be all right.
Did Burroughs have a favorite friend out of all this incredible circle that he knew and traveled with? Was there one in particular that he was closest with or admired the most?
It's interesting how Burroughs interacted with these people. Burroughs was a complex individual himself. He saw others as complex too. He could embrace people in their complexity, and he could enjoy the company of people who had aspects of their personalities that he found repugnant. Henry Ford was an outspoken anti-Semite. That was a part of his character that Burroughs had no respect for. But Burroughs was still willing to associate with people who he disagreed with, so there were things he liked and didn't like about all these men, but I think the one that he liked the most, to get around to answering your question, was Thomas Edison. Edison was very, very funny. He also, like John Burroughs, liked his comforts. He liked to get out in nature and rough it a little bit, but he also liked to read the newspaper, and he liked a nice, comfortable a bed to sleep in and a good warm meal. And those were things that Burroughs connected with. Burroughs and John Muir were always at odds on that. Burroughs was always teased by John Muir for wanting a comfortable bed to sleep in at the end of the day. But Edison and Burroughs were on the same wavelength there. So the two of them really clicked.
Did he admire their genius, or was it the fact that they were so influential?
I think he admired their genius, and I think he saw both men as people who wanted to make life better for people. I don't think he. It's easy from a modern sort of cynical perspective. We tend to be a bit cynical these days. Sometimes when looking back at these figures, we only want to see the dark side, or see them as these Machiavellian figures always advancing their own agendas and trying to get rich. But just by learning about these camping trips, we see a very kindly side of these people. Some of the people they met along the way, people who had lost their houses to a fire. Ford gave them money to build themselves a new house. So there was a kindly side to these people. I think there was a genuine side of Henry Ford, who wanted to make an inexpensive automobile. And really, Ford didn't invent the car. Ford invented the inexpensive car. So Ford made cars accessible to the middle class. He took them out of exclusively the hands of the rich, and made them a much more democratic tool for people to use. And that was something that Burroughs admired Ford for. And Edison certainly in many ways made life much more comfortable for Americans through electrification. Some of the dark sides of some of this stuff we're able to see a little bit more from the perspective of 2010. Some of that wasn't quite so obvious at the time.